So, Rabbi Gruber, tell me about this latest wedding that you officiated.
Sure. Well, it was a very interesting experience. I was contacted a few months before, and I knew that the groom worked for George W. Bush. He had been in the White House, and he basically was one of the few that continued with George W. Bush when he was no longer president, and that the bride had worked in the White House, and then she became an aide to First Lady Barbara Bush. So I knew that both of them would be there. They hardly ever attend private events, but they're kind of the reason that the two met each other. So it was a special event for them, and they were invited and accepted the invitation. But I hadn't, I didn't know what would happen when we would be there in terms of would we meet them or not. But I did know that they were going to be there, and it was a fairly short ceremony. The bride is from a Southern Baptist background, and they're very well known for very short ceremonies. It was a nice short ceremony. I did the 7 wedding blessings, and I chanted a psalm in Hebrew and in English. The pastor spoke very beautifully, actually, about, he spoke specifically about the Hebrew concept of chesed, loving kindness, and how that deep and abiding love pertains to marriage. And so it was a very nice little ceremony, and I think, obviously, a little bit of butterflies in your when you're not just doing a wedding, but you're doing it in front of a small crowd that includes 2 former presidents, but it didn't feel that much different from any other ceremony out there. So that's what the ceremony itself was like.
And did you get to meet the president?
Oh yes, that was. And again, kind of on the way there, my wife was like, well, I think we'll meet him, get a picture, and I said, we'll just see what happens. I certainly. I don't think it's the right thing to kind of throw yourself at a president. So we'll just play it by ear. But after the ceremony, it's very typical that after a ceremony, people don't really know what they're supposed to do. Do you get up? Do you move? But I think in particular, people weren't sure, what they were supposed to do. Since, maybe let the president get up first and walk wherever he wants to walk, especially when you got 2 there. So they did kind of come forward to where I was, to my direction, and President George W. Bush, kind of from probably about 12 feet away, 10 feet, 12 feet away, kind of said, great job, Rabbi. And I said, thank you, sir. And he motioned with his finger that he didn't mean for me to answer from there. He wanted me to actually come forward. So I came forward, and I got to shake his hand and Laura's hand, and then Barbara and George H.W. Bush. So that, and each one of them were like, oh, great job. So that in and of itself, if the experience would have ended there, it would have been like, oh boy, this is pretty cool. But then the elder Bushes went to kind of take some pictures, and I'm not really sure. And then President George W. Bush and his wife Laura, they were kind of standing there, and they wanted to meet my wife, so my wife kind of came forward, and so they shook her hand too. And then Mrs. Laura Bush, I think, went to join the others for pictures, and I was kind of like, okay, well, this has been kind of beyond what I would have expected. But now he'll probably go and join everybody else. Yeah. And that'll be that. But then he stood there for like 10 minutes and just spoke to us, to me and my wife, just asking about kids and where we're from and just tons of different things. So, yeah.
So what was W like?
Well, people, regardless of politics, people always say that, oh, he's a really nice guy. And I think there were polls when he was running against Kerry, they didn't ask people who he'd vote for, but who he'd rather have a beer with, and that was just a landslide for Bush. Most people, even if they voted for Kerry, would much prefer to have a beer with Bush.
Yeah.
So, and he really was just very charming, very just matter of fact. Let me see, what did we talk about? He asked how long we'd been in Dallas. He asked where we were from. He asked about our children. He was very curious about my wife's ancestry. My wife, Liat, is half North African, half Eastern European extraction. So many people kind of look at her and they kind of find her hard to place. So he was very curious about that. And when she told him kind of where her ancestors came from, he said, "Yeah, that's why I asked, because you do have a very interesting exotic look." One thing that I told him that was, my youngest son was born on his birthday in 2002, and for all the years from 2002 to 2008, my wife had urged me to send a card to the president telling him that he shares a birthday with our son, and I never got around to doing it, and then it was too late. He wasn't president anymore. So I seized on the opportunity, and I said, "Oh, Mr. President, just wanted you to know that our youngest son born on July 6th. And he was very happy with that. He's like, "Oh, that's excellent." And later in the conversation, he referred to him as, when he asked, how many kids we had, how old our kids were. And so he said, "Oh, and then your youngest, George, how old is he?" So he referred to him as George, which was kind of funny. His our youngest son's older siblings and classmates and teachers are already giving him a hard time over that. So they're calling him George. So we also, it was interesting. I'd always heard this story about how in 1998. Sharon had taken him up in a helicopter tour to show him the 1967 borders, and kind of specifically pointed out the area where Israel proper within those borders was the narrowest, just about 8 kilometers wide. And so I asked him about this, and I said to him I'd heard that the remark he had made was that there were driveways in Texas that were longer than that, and and he confirmed the whole story. He said, "Yeah, it's very accurate," and he told me the whole story again, and he was very explicit about the fact that he had there was a real connection there, a real mutual affection between himself and Sharon. So it was it was interesting to see that you did have that. Again, very, very, very human side. So yeah, it was, and he thanked me for, helping out the couple, because he knows, I think if he didn't know before, he knows now how difficult it is for couples to find a rabbi to work with them, and so he just thanked me for helping out his guys. So and then his wife called him away for pictures. So even that family has a well-defined hierarchy. So
yeah.
even the president knows who the boss is. So, so it was it's just that one. It's a very extraordinary experience. You don't really expect it, and that's basically.
How did your daughter react to your experience?
Our daughter?
Yeah,
our daughter's 15.
Daughter, right?
Our daughter's 15 and a half. Mom and Dad can't really do anything that's cool. So even even if Mom and Dad meet the president, it's kind of like, okay, whatever. Can I call my friend back now? Nothing tremendously impressive. But our boys were very impressed. They're we've got 7.5 and 9 years old. They were fairly impressed. But yeah, it takes a bit much to impress a 15-and-a-half-year-old girl. Maybe if we'd met Justin Bieber or Miley Cyrus or something like that, but I don't think a president qualifies.
What's the message that you take away